Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down some of the most crucial concepts in the law of evidence, the ideas that decide whether a piece of evidence ever even gets seen by a jury.
So picture this. You think you've struck gold. You found that one killer piece of evidence, the smoking gun that's going to win your case. But here's the thing. It's not nearly as simple as just waltzing into court and showing it off. Before it can do any good, that evidence has to run a whole gauntlet of rules.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to look at the first big hurdles, relevance and admissibility. Then, who gets to decide what? Admissibility versus weight. We'll explore the whole spectrum of an evidence's worth, its cogency. We'll untangle the two very different meanings of prima facie evidence. And finally, we'll look at the ultimate level, conclusive evidence.
All right, let's dive in. The first two gates that every single piece of evidence has to pass through are relevance and admissibility. Now, people mix these two up all the time, but they are fundamentally different things.
Okay, so this is the core split you have to understand. Relevance? That's just a question of logic, common sense. Does this piece of information make the fact we're arguing about more likely or less likely? That's it. But admissibility, that's a question of law. For evidence to be admissible, it has to be relevant, and it has to get past a whole bunch of legal rules designed to keep certain things out, like the famous rule against hearsay.
You know, historically, this got really messy. The famous legal scholar Stephen tried to argue that all the rules of evidence were just about relevance. He'd say something like, hearsay isn't allowed simply because it's, well, irrelevant. But that just caused a whole lot of confusion for a really long time. And that brings us to the real key takeaway here. A lot of the evidence that the law throws out is actually super relevant. I mean, think about it. Someone telling you what they heard an eyewitness say could be incredibly persuasive, right? It's logically relevant, but it's still kept out by a strict rule of law. So here's a good way to think about it. Relevance gets you to the courthouse door, but it's admissibility that gets you inside.
So let's say your evidence made it. It's relevant and it's admissible. It's through the door. Now what? Well, a really important distinction kicks in. Who decides what to do with it? And, what's it actually worth?
This is all about the separation of powers inside the courtroom. Admissibility is a question of law. That makes the judge the gatekeeper. But once the judge lets the evidence in, its weight, how persuasive it is, how believable it is, that becomes a question of fact. And that's for the jury, the trier of fact, to decide. The judge decides if they can hear it, the jury decides what it's worth.
So once a piece of evidence is admitted, how do we talk about its weight? Well, you can think of it as existing on a spectrum of cogency, which is just a fancy word for its persuasive force. And as you're about to see, not all evidence is created equal, not by a long shot.
Let's imagine it as a ladder of evidentiary strength. Right at the bottom, we have evidence that's just too weak to prove anything. Then we climb a rung to evidence that's just enough to be considered. Then we go higher to evidence that actually creates a legal presumption. And at the very top, we have evidence that is so powerful it cannot be challenged at all.
At the absolute bottom of that ladder is what we call insufficient evidence. This is stuff that's so flimsy, so speculative, that no reasonable person could actually use it to make a decision. It doesn't even get you out of the starting blocks.
A classic old case illustrates this perfectly. You had a workman who, sadly, had a fatal heart attack sometime after he'd been pushing heavy trucks at his job. The legal question was, did the work cause the heart attack? But the problem was, the evidence showed that the attack could have been caused by just about anything else. What he ate, taking a walk in the wind, a bunch of other things.
And so the court found that the evidence was insufficient. The connection between his work and his death was, in the court's words, just conjecture. It was pure guesswork. And you can't build a case on guesswork. The evidence had no real weight. Okay, now for a term that trips up pretty much everyone, from law students to actual lawyers. Prima facie. It's Latin for at first sight, and that's simple enough. But in the world of evidence, it actually has two very distinct meanings. And it all depends on the weight of the evidence we're talking about.
So the first and weaker meaning of prima facie describes evidence that's just strong enough to get to the jury. It's a permissible inference. It takes your case out of that realm of conjecture we just talked about. This is the minimum you need to survive a no-case-to-answer submission. It means the jury can find in your favor, but they don't have to. So remember that heart attack case? Now compare it to this one.
A worker was killed when his arm got caught in a machine. And crucially, that machine, by law, was supposed to have a guard on it, but it didn't. See the difference? The connection here is so much stronger. It's direct. A jury could legitimately infer that the failure to guard the machine caused the death. That's a permissible inference. That is prima facie evidence in this first sense.
Now we're taking a huge leap up the ladder. The second sense of prima facie is much, much stronger. This is evidence that is so weighty, so compelling, that it creates a legal presumption. A court is obliged to accept it as true unless the other side can come up with some evidence to challenge it. The burden of proof actually flips.
The textbook example goes like this. A ship sinks for no obvious reason just a little while after it leaves port. There's no storm, no evidence of a collision, nothing. In a situation like that, the law says a court must presume the ship was unseaworthy. The judge would actually tell the jury that they ought to draw that conclusion. It's now up to the ship's owner to prove that it wasn't.
And that brings us to the top of our ladder, the final gate. This is the highest level of cogency there is. This is evidence so powerful, it just ends the argument, right then and there. This is conclusive evidence.
Conclusive evidence is built on something called an irrebuttable presumption of law. That basically means it's a rule that says, this thing is a fact, period. End of discussion. No evidence, I don't care how persuasive it is, can even be brought in to challenge it. The law has settled the matter.
So what are these things? Well, one famous one is the presumption that everybody knows the law. You can't go to court and argue, well, Your Honor, I just didn't know stealing was a crime. It doesn't work. Another example is rules about the criminal responsibility of very young children. These aren't facts that you debate case by case. They are fixed legal principles, usually set for reasons of public policy.
And this leaves us with a really fascinating, kind of mind-bending final thought. When you have a rule that completely prevents any evidence from being presented to challenge it, has it stopped being a rule about proof, a rule of evidence, and has it actually become a fundamental rule of law itself? It's a blurry line, and it shows you just how deeply these ideas about evidence are woven into the very fabric of our rights and duties.